Okay, everybody ready? Shall I, okay if I open the meeting?
I'm ready.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to a meeting of the New York State Compensation Committee. The members of the committee include Comptroller Scott Stringer, Comptroller Thomas Zanapoli, Chairman Bill Thompson, and my name is Carl McCall. Welcome to SUNY Global Center in New York City, where this meeting is being held. The meeting is being webcast, so millions of people are able to watch and participate. So we have the purpose of this meeting is for the organization and provide information about the Compensation Committee, since this is our first meeting. I've been asked to just talk about the mission. I mean, what is the mission of the Compensation Committee, and to talk about the legislation that established the committee. The purpose of the committee is to consider salary adjustments for members of the state legislature and members of the executive staff, commissioners and other particular staff persons, and statewide elected officials. The legislation, which we will now show you on the screen, is outlined here. And the legislation basically lays out the specific responsibilities of the committee. And the most important thing about this is that we have the responsibility, this group, of making a report with respect to possible salary increases. And in doing so, there are some particular things that we have to consider. There are some 7 factors that we have to consider as we look at the possibility of an increase. And those factors are as follows. They're up on the screen. We have to look at the performance and timely fulfillment of the statutory and constitutional responsibilities of the people who might receive increases. We have to look at the overall economic climate in the state, the rates of inflation presently in the state, changes in public sector spending, the levels of compensation and non-salary benefits provided to the executive branch officials and legislators compared to other states and the federal government. And I would add as well, we will look at compared to New York City. And the other thing, we'll look at the levels of compensation as they might be compared to comparable professionals in government, academia, and the private non-profit enterprises. And look at the ability to attract talent in competition with comparable private sector positions. And the state's ability to pay. Since we have people here who have been comptrollers, we understand basically that there's a responsibility to figure out how you pay for all this if you're going to do it. So that too must be considered. One of the possibilities is to phase in additional payments. So payments could be made over a 3-year period. There could be adjustments over the 3-year period in terms of making compensation levels which might increase according to cost of living or other adjustments, so they could in fact be phased in. Another issue raised is that what we have to do ultimately as a group is to vote on any increases, and when we report our vote, we have to describe the reason for the determination, why we are voting for or against any recommendations. The interesting thing is anything in our report with respect to changes in compensation automatically become law. So we're not making a recommendation about increases, we are actually making increases.
Unless the legislature comes
Yeah,
back.
the legislature could change that, which means if we make a report on the 10th of December and the legislature and the governor decide that they do not like that report, they can change it if they have a session sometime between the 10th of December and the 31st of December. So that's basically what the legislation does, and we will operate within the bounds of that legislation as we go forward. Next, we'd the way in which we will communicate with the public during this process is through a website, and Comptroller DiNapoli is going to just tell you about the website, how to access it, and what it contains.
Sure, I think we have a slide to that effect somewhere. I'll let you take care of that. First of all, to Chairman McCall, I want to, I'm sure on behalf of my fellow members, thank you very much for you and your team taking on the responsibility of coordinating this meeting and our efforts. So although the legislation did not designate a chair, appreciate that you've been acting as the coordinator and the chair, and relieves the burden from the rest of us, so we appreciate that very, very much. There is a Compensation Committee website. We have the slide up there. It's an interactive website using a government URL. This website will be the main means of communicating with and receiving information from the public. The web address is up there, nyscompensation.ny.gov. I just want to emphasize that word interactive. It is meant to be an opportunity for people to communicate with us, in addition to this commission having the ability to get information out there in an easy way for public access. As the slide indicates, the website includes the mission of the Compensation Committee, as Chairman McCall just outlined, the legislation that established the Compensation Committee, comparisons of New York State compensation of legislators and other officials to other states and New York City, schedule of meetings and public hearings for the Compensation Committee, and instructions for contacting the Compensation Committee. So I think the website is already up and running, and we hope it will be a helpful tool to keep the public informed and involved in our deliberations.
Thank you, Comptroller. Next, Comptroller Stringer will talk about the compensation comparisons. As you've indicated, the website includes information that really shows how the salaries and compensation and benefits in New York compared to other jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Comptroller Stringer.
Well, thank you, everybody, and I'm going to present this, but to say to you is I think we've covered a lot of the sort of the legislative mandate of what we're doing, but obviously we can discuss this and amend it accordingly, and if we've left things out, we can certainly put things in. This is not the end. This is just, I think, the beginning, but I wanted to do some of that analysis for everybody. So, slide one, you sort of laid it out, Controller. The committee is created as part of the 2019 state budget. Members are familiar with the mission. The legislature, as you said, laid out factors for the committee to consider: cost of living, growth in the state budget, other jurisdictions, private sector compensation, other factors. In terms of our approach, this is how we measured some of those factors over the period since the last pay raise, which was in 1998 and 2017. That's the latest year for which we have complete data. So we looked at inflation. We used the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, public spending, the change in state general fund spending, other jurisdictions. We looked at the highest paid states and New York City. And we took a look at the private sector, change in earnings of comparable private sector positions and industries. So just benchmarking New York State overall, we're the 4th largest population, the 3rd largest economy, and the 2nd largest state funds operating budget excluding federal aid. The legislative background, the base pay currently $79,500 for legislators, the last increase in 1998. There are allowances for certain positions. There's the per diem rate for session days and mileage, as you can see. And when you look at the legislative comparisons, the 2 highest paid state legislatures are Pennsylvania and California. And if the pay increased at a rate of inflation, the rate would be 54%. Let me show you here. Oh, here it is. Let me show you the legislative comparisons. If you look at the yellow bar at the left is New York State. The blue is other jurisdictions. The pink is inflation and state budget spending growth. And the green is the change in the private sector compensation. So the 2 highest paid legislatures are Pennsylvania and California. If pay increased at the rate of inflation, it would be up 54% or $121,000. If pay increased at a rate of state spending growth, that would be up 83% or $145,000. If pay increased at a rate of private sector pay growth in the legal field, roughly doubled in the last 20 years, or $160,000. Looking at statewide elected officials, the last pay increase also dates back to 1998. Governor of New York State is $179,000. Lieutenant governor and a state attorney general is $151,000. And again, using the same metrics again, highest paid in other states in New York City, inflation, budget growth, private sector, wage growth for top executives and upper management. Again, we looked at the two highest paid governors, Pennsylvania and California, $195,000. New York City mayor is at $258,000. We show that private sector earnings growth for chief executive pay has doubled. For the lieutenant governor and attorney general and controller, we see that there are 6 levels set in law in 1999. Top commissioner pay is $136,000. We see Section 169 executive appointees growth as well. So we look at all the various jurisdictions. Let me just show it to you here now. These are the attorney general. These are the attorney general comparisons, as you can see. Again, rate of inflation, the general fund growth, and then we look at the private sector. Same with controller. Controller DiNapoli, $151,000, and then again you see the same metrics we used in the other positions, seeing significant increases both in terms of the general fund spending, inflation, and comparing like-minded professions. These are the commission salaries set by executive law. There's 6 levels. They range from like $90,000 to $136,000. And again, we do the same analysis using our factors, and we see the base commission at $136,000. We see the CPI, the rate of inflation, and also public spending growth and private sector spending growth. Executive appointees, some more information for you. You can see some of the comparisons.
And we do the comparison with New York City, I see, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the measures used in the analysis that you guys have.
Thank you, Comptroller. So we see how we stack up in comparison to the factors that are outlined in the legislation. Before we ask for questions, is there anybody want to add anything to what has been presented so far?
Well, I think.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Thompson. Comptroller.
The one thing just well, it is rare that you're in a meeting and somebody says, "Hey, Mr. Comptroller," and everybody turns around. So it's great to be here, and let me thank you, Carl, in this case, Mr. Chairman, for your assistance in helping move things forward, as well as for making this this venue available to us. So thank you so much. There are, and one of the things, just in informal conversations, the need for public hearings.
Yes.
And at the very least, we had talked about, or reached out, just asked for dates, because it is important that the public, as well as others, have the opportunity to speak to us. I think we've all done in a number of different ways. You want to get that input. You want to hear from people. There are 2 opportunities, and it's on the website, for people to come and speak to us. We have, as well as on the website, but you've got the 28th of November in Albany is the date that begins that hearing. That public hearing begins at 11 a.m. And then Friday the 30th of November, back down here in New York in this building at noon. So the opportunity for the public to reach out, for people to submit testimony, they can do it online, they can do it in person. The requirements and just asking people to bring a certain number of, if they're bringing testimony, the amount of time that they're allotted, those who just show up and how long they're able to speak for, also bringing copies, if they would, of their testimony, so that can be submitted to. All that's on the website. And we'll create 2 opportunities for the public to engage us and us to engage the public before we move forward. So I would just make mention of that, and would obviously urge people to go to the website and take a look, and I believe they can sign up through the website for both hearings.
Terrific.
Mr.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
any general comments that we'd like to make? If not, are there any questions from any?
Is the committee going to be preparing comparison charts on legislative allowances, also known as
5A, what is 5A?
you're establishing legislation says you're to consider
Yeah.
5A of
We
legislative law.
we can consider it, but we do not control it. That is done internally by
You're
the
supposed to
legislative
make
body.
any increases to 5A, which is allowances also known as LULUs.
Well, I'm not sure that covers it, but if it does, we can make them, certainly.
And
My
are
s-
all proceedings of the committee going to be done in open public session?
That has to be.
Yes.
You have more public hearings, instead of just one in New York City. It's unfair in a short period of time. And noon when people have to work.
Well, it's a good point. Let's see what
What's the rush to do this?
let's.
The rush is it has to be
December
done by
10th.
the 10th of
Then wait
December.
next year.
Okay.
What's that?
Then they have to wait till next year because the rush is not fair to the public.
Okay, so your
It's like you're
recommendation
fast-tracking this for a
would be
reason.
not to do it until next year? Okay.
Well, you raise an interesting point. It is a little fast. It's been like 20 years, so we could wait another decade.
Over 10 people were elected just this month.
I understand.
So they received a raise less than 2 months and not even starting their job.
They're the
That's
lucky
why you
ones.
cannot be mayor.
Okay.
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 Any other questions or comments?
No.
Okay, then if
It's a
there,
done deal, from what I heard,
what's a done deal?
the raise.
The rates?
The raise is a done deal.
Okay.
By who?
We're
not-
When,
we're not
when did the
debating.
raise be put in place?
From what I heard, it's a done deal.
Okay, we're not doing a debate. We're not debating.
Come to the hearing, and that's what we're gonna have. We're
I
just
won't be
taking
there, but I know
questions.
it's a done deal.
Don't come then, yeah.
Okay, let's.
All right, now, what we'd like to do is, there is a provision in the law that allows us to have executive sessions for very specific purposes. And so what we are proposing today is that we have an executive session pursuant to, we'll get you the exact section here.
Section 105, Article 7 of the Public Office.
That's it. The public office allows us to do this. And this particular provision allows us to have an executive session for the sole purpose of discussing the employment of a certain person. And one of the things that we as a group believe we need is a counsel, because we're dealing with legislation, we're dealing we certainly want to make sure that we're doing everything within the bounds of the law. And to assist us in that, we believe we need to have a counsel to the committee. And so in executive session, since that is permitted, we will go forward to have that discussion. If any
that
decision
limited
is
area.
made, we will publicly report what that decision is. So we'd like to have a motion to allow us to go into executive session for that purpose.
I make a motion that we move into executive session pursuant to section 105 of Article 7 of the Public Officers Law.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Good. All right, then we will adjourn this meeting. We'll have the executive session. We will come back to the public and report anything that happens, and then we will then adjourn the meeting. But we thank you all for your participation.
Should we wait around? It's going to be long.
Mr. Aronson's.
With that? Okay. I make a motion, we move back into public session.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
We are back in public session. Back to you.
I'd like to report that we had a executive session to talk about the employment of a counsel to the committee. We've come up with a couple of names, and we're going to pursue them. And if any decision is made, we will have to have another meeting, at which time we will report that. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Seconded.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Adjourned.
You're the one who talked.